Is anything real? Or is everything that you experience just something created in your mind? You can find non-dual teachers who say the world is not real, it's an illusion. The self is not real, it's an illusion. You don't exist, nothing actually exists. I have talked about this before, but I thought about a new angle here, because what I would like to do first here is say, why do such ideas appeal to people? I just did a video about why the ideas of non-self appeal to people, but I wanted to do one also, why do these ideas that nothing is real appeal to people? And I said in the previous video, it's because there are a lot of people in this day and age. We are in a transition period between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. There's a lot of people in embodiment who want to question some of these deep assumptions that dominated the age of Pisces. So there's a good reason for why many people are interested in these ideas. But really, when you think about this one, as I also said in the other video, sometimes these ideas that challenge the assumptions from Pisces, they can become a trap too. So we have to question ideas without creating new ideas that become a trap. We can say that people have been trapped by certain ideas in the last 2,000 years. Many of us are in embodiment now to challenge these ideas, but we have to be careful we don't create new ideas that become just as much of a trap as the ideas that trapped people in Pisces. So we have to begin to question what's real and what's unreal without falling into a new trap. And what I would like to propose here is, again, why do these ideas that nothing is real, why do they appeal to some people? And it's simply because there are some people who have not taken full responsibility for themselves. Now, you can say, what exactly does that mean? You take responsibility for yourself. Well, what are you? What are you right now? You're watching this video. You're taking in my words. Your mind may be going, agreeing with it or not agreeing with it. But what are you? You are conscious. The bottom line is, you are conscious. That's why you are experiencing this video, you're experiencing the device you are watching it on, the room you're in, the environment beyond it. You can become aware of all of these things because you're conscious. Now, by the mere fact that you are conscious, you have a certain responsibility. And the basic way to express that responsibility is to say, you are responsible for what you do with your consciousness, with your awareness, with your sense of self, whatever you want to call this. But you are conscious. What do you do with it? Not only right now, but what do you do with the fact that you are a conscious being inhabiting a physical body on this physical planet called Earth. You have a certain limited lifespan. However many years you've been in this body, however many years you might think you have left. You have opportunities for doing something with that. So the very basic responsibility you have is, what do I do with my conscious experience here on Earth? And that will very much depend on how you deal with this question of what is real and what is not real. So we could also say that by the very fact that you are conscious, you have a responsibility to consider the question, what's real, what's not real. You have a responsibility to discern between what's real and what's unreal, you have a responsibility to develop your ability to discern between what's real and what's unreal. So if we go with that thought, let's just go with that thought and see where it takes us, right? So what is it in the age of Pisces? What did many people believe? Well, many people believed that they were created by this almighty God up there in the sky, but they were created as imperfect beings. They were created as sinners, and if they don't behave, if they don't obey the outer religion, they'll go to hell for all eternity. This is one of the illusions that people were trapped in during Pisces, one of the illusions that we, who are, as I said in my previous video, the forerunners for a shift, we are here to question. And of course, if you're watching this, you are probably open to the spiritual side of life. That means you've already questioned this, because most religious people would be afraid to even watch a video like this. But there's another illusion we're meant to question, and that's science, which says, no, you weren't created by this almighty God, because there is no God. There's nothing beyond the material world. You are only a product of your brain function, how your neurons are firing in your brain. So there's nothing more to you than the brain. And when the brain dies, poof, you're gone. So this is another thing that has been put upon humanity over the last couple of hundred years. And it's another thing we're meant to question. Is that real or is it unreal? Is it real that there's a God? Is it real that there's no God? So how do we complete this? How do we go about this task of questioning what most people are not willing to question, because they just take one or the other belief system they take for granted that this is reality. So how do we question this? Well, part of what has happened, especially in the last few decades, I mean, I look back to when I started the spiritual path. That was in 1976 when I found the spiritual path. And back then, there were spiritual teachings. I mean, non-duality was not even talked about. I don't think it was even a concept. Maybe a few talked about it, but it's not generally known. But then what has happened, especially over the last couple of decades, is that non-duality has become much more known. And there's a part of this non-duality phenomenon where they basically question everything. So instead of saying, is the religious worldview real or unreal, and is the scientific worldview real or unreal, they're saying, oh, nothing is real. Everything is unreal. But is that taking responsibility for yourself? Because as I said, the first aspect is you're conscious. Your responsibility is to choose what do you do with that, the fact that you're conscious in a physical body on earth. And if you say nothing is real, you're really abandoning that responsibility, because you're saying, I don't want to do anything. I just want to become unconscious. And in fact, the highest goal of spiritual growth or spiritual awakening is to realize that I don't exist. There is no self. So I just disappear into infinite awareness or Brahman or pure awareness or whatever. So there's nothing to do with my consciousness other than wait to become unconscious. But that's not taking up your responsibility. The other thing is, as I said, the other aspect of our responsibility is to distinguish, to discern between what's real and unreal. But if you say scientific materialism isn't real, religion isn't real, because nothing is real, you're not discerning between what's real and unreal. You're just flipping from one extreme where you, for example, believe that the materialist view is real, to the opposite where nothing is real. So is there a deeper approach here? Well, obviously there is, or I wouldn't be talking, right? So what is that? Well, the deeper approach It's complicated because there are so many questions that these non-dual teachers are not asking. Because once you have decided that nothing is real and the self is not real, it's like I said, you abandon your responsibility, but how do you fulfill your responsibility? By asking questions. Not just simple questions like, is materialism real, is religion real? But why is it not real? And what shows that it isn't real? And what could be real? How could we even determine what's real and unreal? All of these questions you don't have to ask. Once you decide, oh, nothing is real and I'm not real and I'm just waiting for this awakening where I stop existing. And so what we are really meant to do, if we are to be, as I said, if we are to be the forerunners for a shift in humanity or humankind's awareness, we can't abandon our responsibility to discern, because then we're not going to shift anything. So we have to start asking some of these questions. And one of the questions we could ask is, how can we, being in a physical body on earth, how can we determine what's real and unreal? And what we could realize, first of all, is that what most people have been doing in the age of Pisces is, most people have not asked that question. They have looked at, oh, here's a religious authority that tells me what's real and unreal, and I accept that. Or here's a scientific authority that tells me what's real and unreal, and I accept that. And once you accept that there's an authority that has told you what is real and unreal, you don't need to think. You can abandon your responsibility to discern what's real and unreal. Oh, yeah, the priests, the Pope knows better. The scientific materialist, Richard Dawkins, knows better what's real and unreal. But that's not what we are meant to do if we are going to be forerunners, because in the age of Aquarius, many more people, I'm not saying everybody, but many more people are going to take up that responsibility to discern what's real and unreal. And if we are the forerunners, well, we have to do it. We can't just abandon it. So, what we can see then is that during Pisces, the question about what was real and unreal was dealt with by saying, you, as an ordinary person, you can determine what's real and unreal. Only certain authority figures can determine this, whether it's the Pope of the Catholic Church or the popes of science. They can tell you what's real and unreal, and you just need to obey this. Now, as I said, when I first discovered the spiritual path in 1976, basically what you found back then, this was before the internet, of course, so books was the main source, and books were often written by a guru. Like my first book was Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And he was obviously a guru, presented himself as a guru. And there were many other gurus at the time. So, but they were also authority figures. So they would also be seen as, here's the guru, he can tell you what's right and wrong. And this is the pattern that you still see in most of the non-duality movement. That you have these people who set themselves up as gurus, or who are revered as gurus, like Ramana Maharshi, and they're the authority figures. They can tell you what's real and unreal. But again, if you're just following a guru, you are abandoning your responsibility to discern for yourself. How can you know what's real and unreal? So, back to my statement. In Pisces, people dealt with the question by saying, I can't know, only certain special experts can know, and they tell me what's real and unreal. What we are meant to do in Aquarius is realize, no, all human beings have the ability to discern between what is real and what is unreal. We have that ability by the very fact that we are conscious. By the very fact that you are a conscious being, you have the ability to discern between what's real and unreal. You may feel like right now you don't have that ability. You can't tell what's real and unreal. Right. That's actually a good place to be, even though it's an unpleasant place to be. But it's a good place to be because you look at what happened in Pisces. Most people felt, because I've accepted this expert and what this belief system is saying, I know everything. I don't need to ask questions anymore. I don't need to look beyond what my religion tells me, or what science tells me, or what communism tells me, or my guru tells me. I don't need to think for myself. I don't need to discern for myself. So if you are doubting that you have the ability, that means you're not just blindly accepting some expert. And then it's just a matter of developing, sharpening your ability to discern. And that can be done. So, and I've talked about this in a number of videos. I'll return to it in a little later. But the point here is, in Pisces, the experts told people what was real and unreal. In Aquarius, a very large number of people, not just a few. It's way beyond gurus. Millions of people, millions upon millions of people are meant to develop their ability to discern what's real and unreal. And how can we do this? Well, we can ask ourselves further questions, such as, when you see the Piscean pattern, that there were authority figures that were considered to know what's real and unreal, what were they basing that claim on? This is most easy to see with science, materialism. So materialism is saying, first of all, only what we can detect with our physical senses and with physical instruments exists, is real. There's nothing beyond the material world. They're simply defining a boundary, an imaginary boundary, mind you, but they're defining a boundary that says, inside of this is the material realm, this is real, there's nothing outside. There's no God, there's no spiritual realm, nothing. No heaven, no hell. This is obviously a claim defined in this material world, right? Because science, it claims by itself that there's nothing else, there's nothing beyond it. So the authority of science is an authority in this world. Now we can take religion, and of course the Christians will claim the Bible is the Word of God. But we know, if we're spiritual people, it didn't fall from heaven, fully printed. It was created over a long period of time, written by men. And more importantly, the Bible has been taken by institutions, and these institutions have given it authority. And if you look at the Catholic Church, for example, as I've said before, if you look at Jesus, he opposed the religious authorities of Jewish society, and that's why they had him killed. But 300 years later, the Christian religion became dominated by the Catholic Church, who set itself up as the same kind of authority as the authority of the Jewish religion, and now they defined what was real and unreal. But they claimed they weren't doing this by themselves. They had the authority directly from Jesus and God to define what is real and unreal, because the Pope is the vicar of Christ and this and that. Then you have fundamentalist churches today who are saying, the Bible is the Word of God, therefore we take the word literally, and this gives us authority. But all of these claims are still based on something in this world. Because as soon as the Bible was written down, it became something in this world, and it's expressed in words, and words can be interpreted endlessly. Just look at Christians. For 2,000 years they've been debating, what do the words in the Bible actually mean? What did Jesus mean when he said, let the dead bury their dead? Was he talking about corpses running around burying other corpses? So, what I'm saying is, even the religions we saw in the Piscean age, they were authorities in this world. So, what we can see when we look at history is that human beings have had this tendency, for as far as we can look back, to create these belief systems and to claim that this is the ultimate belief system. But we also see that there has never been a situation where there was only one belief system that had become victorious and eradicated all the others. We never had a situation where all people accepted one belief system. There's always been at least one opposing it. Capitalism, communism, for example. Science, religion. So there's always been an opposition to any belief system. And if you had a belief system that was real, why would it have an opposition? Ask yourself this question. Because what they're really saying is that their belief system defines what's real because it's based on what's real. There really is an angry, judgmental man with a long beard sitting up there in heaven, sending us to hell if we don't obey the Catholic Church. Or there really is nothing beyond the material world, and therefore the popes of science are right. They are saying this is real. But if it was real, why would there be an opposition? So what we see is that, we can just observe this by looking at history. When human beings use what they can see in this world to define what's real and unreal, they always end up in an argument. They always end up in conflict. They always end up in a struggle. And the struggle creates what? Suffering, like the Buddha said. But the suffering really comes from the fact that people are trying to create an ultimate truth or ultimate reality, an ultimate picture of reality in this world. And it seems that when people do this, there will always be two opposite polarities. And this is what I've said any number of times, is what most non-dual teachers have overlooked. Because non-dual teachers are focusing on this concept they created of non-duality. But non-duality means not duality, not the duality consciousness. So what we can realize is that what people were trying to do in the age of Pisces is they were using a specific state of consciousness to try to define ultimate reality. So they were saying, for example, communism is the ultimate economic system. This is how the economy really works. But it had an opposite, capitalism. And there was a struggle between the two. And ended up with one of them collapsing. You can debate whether the other one is collapsing as well, but nevertheless, my point is, in the duality consciousness, whatever you define there will be relative to something else, because there will always be an opposite. And as long as there are opposites, you do not have reality. Because if you think about it, if there is something, as there is a reality, it can't be opposed by anything. I know it's a silly example, but I was profoundly affected when I think I was 10 years old, learned that 500 years ago, all people in Europe, actually even based on the authority of the Catholic Church, thought the earth was flat and it was the center of the universe. And it hit me that here you have all of these people who were believing this. But of course, the earth was just as round 500 years ago as it is today. And the earth was not any more the center of the universe 500 years ago as it is today. So what hit me was that human beings can define these belief systems. They have no impact on reality. They don't change reality. They only change how we look at reality. And that made a profound impact on me. It probably was what started me on the spiritual path, because it helped me think about how we human beings can create these belief systems in our minds. But it doesn't change reality. And I realized even back then, I didn't want to accept some man-made belief system. I wanted to know reality. What is real? So, when we go down this line of questioning, we can come to see that what humankind has been engaged in, humankind at large have been engaged in for all of known history, is this attempt to use something in this world, something based on the duality consciousness, to define what's real. And they have never succeeded. Therefore, we can say, as more aware people, as spiritual people, we can say, I don't want to repeat this pattern of seeking to take something in this world and use it to define what's real. Because I realize that the moment we take something in this world and try to define what's real, we are in a state of duality, a state of consciousness where there will always be two opposites. So whatever we define as real will have an opposite, and therefore it can't be reality. Because reality can have no opposition. Yeah, human beings can create a belief that the earth is flat, but the reality is the earth is round. And the planet doesn't start to flatten out because people believe it's flat. It only affects people's experience. So what I realized was, I want to know reality. So, as I've said in many of my videos about non-duality, and in my whole playlist about duality, the problem with the non-duality phenomenon is that very few non-dual teachers have realized that there's something called the duality consciousness. And therefore, even though they have created this concept of non-duality, they have created this concept based on the duality consciousness, that non-duality is meant to take us beyond. So, what does that mean in practical terms? Well, is anything real? Is anything unreal? We can now see that as long as we are thinking there's something real as opposed to something unreal, we are in duality. But there must be something beyond duality that actually is real, but it doesn't have an opposite. And that is real, but what is the difference? So we have a dualistic polarity between real and unreal, but this is all, both of them are illusions. And then outside of duality, outside of this consciousness, this way of looking at life, there is a reality that has no opposite. Duality isn't the opposite of reality. It's just creating an illusion that this unreal thing is actually real and that unreal thing is unreal. It's just a definition created in the mind. The mind that has stepped into behind this veil of duality, which is also what the Buddha called Maya, the veil of illusion. So when you realize that, you can take the next step and say, so what has humanity been engaged in for all of known history? An attempt to define reality with our minds that are trapped in the duality consciousness, the illusion that we're separate beings. So, is there something beyond this? And we must say, I mean, for me, it's logical at least, that where did we come from? Where did the world come from? Why are we even here? Why is there something here? We must somehow have originated. The world must have originated. Because it has never been credible to me that the world is created in our minds. Like some non-dual teachers will say, there's no one here talking, talking is just happening. Then everything is meaningless. Then it's pointless to talk about what's real and unreal. Because if everything is created in the mind, nothing is real or unreal. There's no reality. It's just all in the mind. But what I'm saying is that it has always been obvious to me intuitively that there is something beyond what our minds have created. And why is that obvious to me? Not because of some sophisticated argument, but because I have experienced that there's something beyond my own mind. It's what millions of people have had. They are often called mystical experiences or non-dual experiences. But it's an experience where something happens. Suddenly it's as if something in you steps outside of your mind, your normal way of looking at life. And you have an experience, and it can take different forms. But two things are common for these experiences. First of all, it's not your normal state of mind. And two, it's real, more real than what you experience in your normal state of mind. And so therefore, it's always been obvious to me that there is a part of me that is, number one, beyond my outer mind, beyond my physical body for that matter, but even beyond my mind. And it's real. Number two, it's real. More real than the outer mind. In the outer mind, everything can change. But this that I experience is not fluctuating like my emotions can be fluctuating or my thoughts can come and go. It's a constant. So when you have that experience, then it's obvious to you that there is something that wasn't created by your mind, your outer mind. You can go back into your mind and you can have all kinds of beliefs and opinions and they can seem quite valid or real to you. But once you have stepped outside, you gain a whole different perspective. You realize all of these opinions that you used to think was so real and so important, they're suddenly not that important anymore because they don't actually define you. They don't define who you are. So when you've had these experiences, and really if you haven't had these experiences, I don't think there's any argument I can come up with that would convince you. But if you've had these experiences, you can use them to realize that the experience is more real than what you experience through the outer mind, because in the outer mind, everything is created in the mind by this interplay of these two dualistic polarities. And when there is an opposition, none of the two polarities are real, because reality has no opposition. That's what you experience. You are experiencing. There's a reality that's not opposed by anything. You have, in the Christian religion, you have a God who has an opposite, the devil. But when you have a mystical experience, you can actually experience that there is a spiritual being, but it has no opposite. There can't be any opposition. So what you actually can come to, as you have more of these experiences, as they become more clear, is you can realize that the reality, the deeper reality, that's beyond any dualistic definition of reality is one. Everything is one. Everything came out of one source. You have this saying that's often quoted by non-dual teachers, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. But at this point, that statement is dualistic, because it sets up a dualistic polarity between a real Brahman and a world that's an illusion. But the full quote, which many times the non-dual teachers don't give you the full quote, but the full quote is, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, the world is Brahman. Because where would the world come from? Brahman, the creator, God, source, whatever you want to call it. There was once a time when there was only that and the world hadn't come into being. So that means that here is the being who created our world. It was all there was. It could only create the world out of itself. So the reality is, everything is one interconnected whole. There's no separation in reality. But what you experience in the duality consciousness is that you are a separate being. That's why you think you can define ultimate reality in your mind. That's why you can believe that, oh, there is no world, everything is just created in my mind. There is no self, I don't actually exist. But when you have these experiences and have more of these experiences, you realize, I am real. There's a part of me that's real because the awareness that I am is an extension of the Creator's being. I am an extension of the one mind. But I am an individual extension. I'm not the fullness of the one mind. Like some people will say, you are God. No, you are an individual extension of God who has a certain awareness, whereas God has total awareness of everything. So you're seeing yourself as an individual being, and you can't do anything else until you raise your consciousness to the same level as the Creator, which, as I've said in several videos, is our highest potential. But my point is that right now, you have an individual awareness. And what has happened here on earth is that most people have gone into this illusion that we're separate beings. And we can do this because we have been given free will. And the reason we've been given free will is that that's the only way we can expand. We can start with a localized sense of self, and we can expand our sense of self until we reach the same level of consciousness as our source, which is the whole purpose of the world of form. World of Form is actually an educational institution meant to take individual beings with a point-like sense of self and gradually raise them to the level of consciousness of the being who created the world. And we can do this because we are out of the Creator's consciousness. So as some people have said, there is a being that is looking at the entire world all at once from an outside perspective. But we are the individual extensions of that being looking at its creation from inside the creation. And we can expand our awareness of creation. So what does that mean in terms of real and unreal? It means there is a reality that is unaffected by anything we can create here on earth through this dualistic mind. And that reality is that everything is one. Everything is connected. Everything is a whole. An interdependent whole, like the Buddha said, the interdependent originations. Which essentially quantum physics has proven too, that everything is an interconnected whole. So this is reality. And so this means that with our free will, we have two options. I've said this before, but it's important to repeat it here. We have two options. We can see ourselves as connected to something outside our own minds, some reality outside our own minds. And we can seek to expand that connection, that awareness of what we are connected to, what we are part of. That's raising your consciousness. And that is a process of discovering what's real. The other option we have, which is perfectly allowed by free will, is we can go into what I call this illusion that we are separate beings. The only way we can do this is to use the duality consciousness. In the duality consciousness, we are taking two relative polarities, real, unreal, and then we are seeking to elevate one of them to some ultimate status, which can never actually be done. But it can give us this experience that we are defining what's real and unreal. In other words, our minds are capable of defining what's real and unreal. And you can see throughout history that some people have had this experience that they were so sophisticated that they could define what was real and unreal. It can be the Roman emperors who believed they were God on earth, the Egyptian pharaohs who believed they were God on earth, the popes of the Catholic Church, the party bosses of the communist world, the gurus or non-dual teachers of today, the scientific materialists of today. There are all these people who have believed that they were so sophisticated they could define what was real, but they used the duality consciousness to do it, which means their definition was unreal. But it gave them and the people who followed them the experience for a time. But of course, reality is that everything is one. So the Creator doesn't want part of its own being to be stuck in illusion indefinitely. So therefore, you can only get this experience that you are able to define reality when you go into the separation, and there will always be an opposite polarity that will oppose your claim that you have the ultimate truth, and therefore you can't forever stay in that illusion. So really, as I've said before, the whole purpose of allowing beings to go into separation is that you exercise your free will based on this illusion of separation until you've had enough of it. You're just tired of it. You are tired of trying to use the dualistic mind to define what's real. And as I said in my previous video, many people who are in embodiment today in this transition period, who have come to that point where they're tired of trying to define with their minds what's real and unreal, or thinking that some guru has defined what's real and unreal. But there are people, unfortunately, many of these people who haven't yet made the switch of realizing that the alternative to trying to define what's real and unreal is to consciously acknowledge that you are connected to something beyond your own mind, and therefore go into a process of seeking to discover what's real by questioning and eventually abandoning all of these definitions created here on earth. And there are some of these non-dual teachers out there who have set themselves up as teachers, but they haven't discovered this. And therefore, they have come to a point where they are tired of the dualistic mind, but they haven't realized what they are tired of. They haven't realized that it's the dualistic mind they are tired of, not the mind, the real mind that they are, not the core of their beings. It's not consciousness, it's not awareness they are tired of. They are tired of walking around in this make-believe world. As I talk about, the earth can be compared to a reality simulator. They are tired of simulated experiences, but they are still so trapped in duality that they reason that the only way to escape the simulation is to have no awareness. And that's why they fall for this idea that the world is unreal, the self is unreal. Nothing actually exists. But as I said, It's really just an abandoning of your personal responsibility to reconnect to something outside your own mind, and to use that direct experience, that there's a part of you that's beyond the outer mind, to use that experience to gradually become more and more aware of what you're connected to, the whole. The whole. And as I've said before, once you make that switch, you can very quickly come to realize that it's not actually correct that you are only pure awareness. I've given the model before that we have the outer mind, and the outer mind has layers. There's a part of the mind that's very much centered around the physical body. Then we have the emotional part of the mind, and then the mental part of the mind where we think. But the highest part of the outer mind is our sense of identity, our deepest sense of identity, related to this world. So our identity is, I'm a man, I'm white, I'm Danish, I'm this, I'm that. That's your identity, but that's not really who you are. When you step beyond that, you can experience that there's a part of your being that's beyond the outer mind. I call it the conscious you. It can be called other things, and it has been called other things by mystics. But this conscious you, in the beginning, it will often experience itself as pure awareness, neutral awareness, the silent witness. You're just observing the world. You're not observing the world through this filter of the outer mind that colors how you see the world. So you have no opinions, you have no value judgments. This is good, this is bad, this should happen, this shouldn't happen. You have none of that. You're just neutrally observing the world. But that's only the first stages of mystical experiences, because as you become more familiar with this, the conscious you can begin, instead of looking out at the world, or instead of just being anchored in itself, it begin to say, to wonder, where did I come from? Is there more to me than just this? And that's when you can then connect to the fact that you are, the conscious you is an extension of your higher self, your spiritual self that exists in the spiritual realm, which is really just a realm of higher vibrations. You can also connect to the fact that there are beings in that higher realm that are actually assigned to help us expand our awareness. I call them ascended masters. Again, they can be called other things. So you have the illusion of separation. The only way to really escape that is to connect to something beyond this reality-unreality polarity created in the mind. And the whole concept of spiritual teachers, valid spiritual teachers, is that there are beings who have already completed this process. They have been in embodiment on earth over many, many lifetimes, like we have, but they have graduated from schoolroom earth. They have gone through the final awakening of realizing who they are. And therefore, they have mastered their own minds, and therefore they don't need to re-embody. So they have ascended to the spiritual realm. That's why I call them ascended masters, because they have ascended through self-mastery. And some of those have chosen to remain with earth to help us go through the same process they have gone through. That's why the ascended masters, their motto is, what one has done, all can do. And this is what I said a long time ago. In the Piscean age, millions of people are meant to sharpen their ability to discern between the unreality created by the mind and the reality that's beyond the mind. And so, really, when you look at these teachers who are saying, nothing is real, it's all created in the mind, the world is not real, it can only be because they haven't connected to the reality that was not created by their minds or by any mind that's in separation and duality. Because it's only when you see yourself as a separate being that you can believe that your mind can define reality. And when you connect, you realize that your mind can discover reality. But how do you discover reality? By overcoming the illusions that made you think that your mind could define reality. The illusions that are based on this duality consciousness that made it seem real, that the duality consciousness could define what's real. These are the illusions we have to overcome. These are the illusions that we who are forerunners for shift are meant to question. But you don't question them if you say that everything is unreal. And it's only a matter of having this instantaneous shift so you awaken and see that everything is unreal. It can only be done systematically. Why? Because when you decided to go into duality, it was like walking into a maze where you're walking, the path divides. So you have to choose, do I go that way or that way? So you make a choice. Then you go that way. Then you forget you made a choice. Then there's another split. You make another choice. You forget you made a choice. So now you have gone deeply into this maze that you have created. The maze exists only in your own mind. But it's made up of these illusions that you come to accept based on duality. And this is fine, because you can learn from this process. You can grow in awareness through this process. But how do you grow? You don't grow by taking on an illusion and forgetting it. You only grow when you go back to that illusion, that decision, and said, why did I accept that illusion? I see now that it's an illusion. I'm going to give it up. That's how you grow. So in other words, you don't grow by walking into the maze, which you can do half consciously, but you grow by consciously walking out of the maze. And that's why if you could take a person who was deeply into this personal maze of illusions and instantly catapult it to the enlightened state, what would the person learn from it? There would be nothing to be learned. What we who are forerunners can show to other people is how we systematically, step by step, walk out of our personal maze by overcoming all these illusions. And if you describe your process and I describe my process, well, there may be somebody who can relate to you who can't relate to me. And therefore, more and more people, it will spread like rings in the water, more and more people will be able to find somebody who says, oh, this guy started out just like me, he had the same problems in childhood, and he has overcome, so let me look at my illusions and overcome them by using his or her example. So, there's no point in instant awakening. In fact, teachers who are instantly awakened are not really teachers. There might be examples that you can awaken, but they are not teachers who teach you a systematic gradual process for awakening. There's a need for teachers in the Aquarian age who have followed that gradual process and who can describe that to other people. And you could be one of them. But in order to be a teacher, you have to consciously walk that process of undoing the illusions that you came to accept when you were walking into the maze. And that is not going to happen just like that. So, anyway, as I said, I don't have any sophisticated argument here, intellectual, rational argument. I think if you have experienced stepping outside of the outer mind, you can relate to what I'm saying here. If you haven't experienced it, you are probably already come up with sophisticated arguments for why what I'm saying isn't true and everything really is an illusion. And there's nothing I can do about it. I don't really have any ambition of doing anything about it, because if I had an ambition of convincing you that I'm right, I'd just be like all the other non-dual teachers out there. I'm not interested in convincing you of anything. I'm not interested in convincing you that I am right or I'm superior. My interest is to help you connect to the one reality that I have connected to. Because that has been the most rewarding experience of my life, to connect to that one reality. And I know it can be for you too.